Chara Shalom. Welcome to our watercolor journey. Today's painting is more of an illustration than an actual work of art. It is just a little bird with flowers, and it's something to have a lot of fun with. The materials used are listed in the description below. We are working with core colors, and I will talk a little bit about them a little bit later on. And we only used small brushes this time. The sketch is also available, and the link is in the description below. Now, the paper is flat on the table, and contrary to normal watercolor rules, we started with the dark of the eye first and 1 or 2 strokes of the neutral tint, just to give us a little bit of a perspective of what is happening in the bird. Usually when you do the rest of the bird first, it sometimes becomes difficult to put the eye exactly where it's supposed to be. Now, like I said, this is just an illustration, so nothing is precise, nothing is very detailed. It is just fun to play with. Core colors are amazing. As you can see, they spread like wildfire, and the reason is that they use a different binder than paints like Holbein or Winsor & Newton. Core uses a binder called Aqua, and it helps to let the paint flow very, very easily. It is a very concentrated paint, so you don't really need a lot of it, and that's why I'm saying it is quite economical to use. It's got quite a strong pigment concentrate. So we're going on with the flowers there, and all the flowers, the hearts are painted. We start with yellow, then we add a little bit of transparent Pyrol orange, and here and there a touch of sepia, just to create variation. And you don't have to follow the exact same pattern with each of them. Play around. Add colors that you think would make the heart stand out a little bit more, and that will give a little bit more shadow to one side and more light to the other side. What is nice about an illustration like this is that it can go fairly fast, because you don't really need to let it dry completely. And as we are working wet on dry, it helps to let the colors fuse easily and blend nicely on the paper. And even if the leaves touch each other and the colors flow into each other, it gives it a more spontaneous, natural look. Now, you can see there that with some of the leaves we added yellow first and then the Viridian, or we added Viridian and then neutral tint, or Viridian and sepia. It depends on what you want to do with your leaf. Now, the cooler colors obviously are for the leaves that are in the further background, and warmer colors will be used for the leaves in the front. Your leaves don't all have to look the same, and be careful not to make it too wet, because then it's definitely going to flow everywhere. The neutral tint is mostly used to create the shadow parts of the different elements in the picture. Now there Heinrich dropped a few drops of the yellow paint, and if you're quick enough, you can just wet it a little bit with your brush and then dab it out with a paper towel. Or if you feel that the color you used isn't exactly what you wanted, dab it out very quickly with a paper towel. Watercolor can be quite forgiving at times, but if you do use a staining color, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get rid of your little glitches. One of the most satisfying things to see when you use core paints is how it flows, how it spreads. The moment that you put a new color into the previous one or into a wet environment, it spreads so beautifully, it literally looks like magic. There are quite a few leaves in this painting, so it can be monotonous maybe. But if you think about how you want to use the different colors and how you want the leaves to stand out or recede or shine or have shadows, then it becomes an interesting exercise in science, basically, because every single color that you add to the leaf makes it look differently. And that is what is so interesting when you use a painting like this. You don't have to be precise. You can experiment and you can play around and see what works and what doesn't. Look at that, how beautifully the sepia just spread into the Viridian there. By adding a few touches of the darker color or blue or the neutral tint to one part of the leaf, you also create a little bit of dimension in your leaf so they don't all look flat. It gives it shape. Many artists believe that you need to rinse your brush every single time that you go to a new color. But sometimes if you want something to look more natural, then you don't need to. You can dab your brush into the one color and then go directly to the next color, and it would create its own variety. If you look at the leaves there, we basically used Viridian and the Hansa yellow, sepia, and a little bit of neutral tint. And in general, not a single one of those leaves look the same, although they are all painted with the same basic colors. Now keep in mind, later on the painting will have to dry a little bit, and then you are going to add another layer. So even though this might look a little bit flat at the moment, if you look at the end result, you will see that there's a lot of depth and dimension in the leaves and in the flowers and in the bird. And that comes with layering. So take your time and be patient. This has a lot of little nitty-bitties of elements, and you need to take your time and really enjoy the process. When you paint the branch, keep in mind that the bottom part of the branch is more in the shadow and the top part is more in the light. So the bottom part on the left is going to be a little bit darker, and the color is going to fade into a lighter brownish yellow when you get to the right hand side of the painting where there's more light. And here again you can see you don't have to be very precise with the brush strokes when you paint the little branches or the little stems of the flowers. It is an illustration. You can make loose lines, they don't all have to connect. You can literally just drag your brush over it and the illusion of solid branches will be there. Your eyes will fill in the rest of the details. Now we are starting with the flowers, and again here You can choose. Do you want them purple? Do you want them pink? Do you want them yellow? Whichever color you want to. And again, now you are going to use the warmer colors, the red, the Quinacridone Magenta, Dioxazine Violet, the mixture of the Quin Magenta and Dioxazine Violet, which is a very interesting color, and the yellow as well. So the flowers are a little bit different from the leaves. You are going to try to get a more uniform idea there, but still just randomly add your colors that you want to into it. And these are all the little buds. Buds are usually, the colors in a bud is more dense than the color in an open flower, generally, not always, but generally. So you are going to keep it a little bit denser on the buds. And then when we get to the flowers, you will see that the colors are going to be a lot more transparent. Okay, so now you can let this dry a little bit so that you can get your colors ready for your next layer. So we're going to start with the flowers now. And the background of the flower, or the outside of the flower, is usually in shadow. So here we are going to wet it a little bit and add little touches of neutral tint to give us the shadow color for the flowers. And we're going to follow basically the same principle with each of the flowers. And again, because they are not touching, you don't need to have to wait for each of them to dry. You do the background of the one flower, then you go to the next flower and do the background, and so on. And then by the time you're done, then you can go back to the first one again and continue your process. You can, of course, outline them a little bit like that if you want to, but it's not really necessary. And the cooler colors, the blue added to the neutral tint, just gives it a little bit more dimension. It seems that for botanicals, or anything resembling botanicals, the brushes with the longer tips work quite nicely, but they are also quite tricky to work with because they are so flexible. So make sure that you practice a little bit if you haven't used it before, just so that you know how to control the tip of the brush so that it doesn't make a mess on your paper. And again, when you paint this, you don't have to follow exactly what we are doing. You can look at the idea of how this whole thing is put together, and you can follow your own pattern, your own direction with it. Sometimes watercolorists jump around a lot on a paper when they paint, and because you don't know beforehand what they are thinking, it can be quite difficult to follow. So the basic idea is just add a little bit of a base paint to your flower, and then choose your colors that you want to add, and then go from flower to flower and just paint them as you like. If you want the colors to spread more naturally, then you can wet the flower first like we did here, and then add the rest of the colors. But you can start with your base color and then add colors as well. The choice is yours. You can work wet on dry or wet on wet. Just remember that with core paints, wet on wet is a tricky thing, and you need to watch how much paint you add to your existing layer, especially if the existing layer is still wet. Because all the flowers are part of the same branch, you still want to have a uniform color scheme going through. So you won't paint every single blossom the same color, but you want the base colors to be the same. So if you take a little bit from the one and add it to the other, then that's quite fine. That will bring uniformity and harmony into your flowers. Now the little buds have dried nicely, so the second layer can be added, where you add a little bit of shadow, maybe if you want to a little bit more detail to it as well. And you can see there we pick up some of the paint from the top flower and add it to the others, just to get that same color scheme or tone running through the whole picture. Another layer at the bottom of the branch, just to give it a little bit more shadow there. And now we get to our bird. You can wet it first, like we did here, and you are going to add the base blue to it. And oh, how beautiful that spreads. And then let the blue settle a little bit. You can add a touch of the neutral tint so that there's variation in it, because the bird is not a uniform blue. As the light shines on it, it's going to have different shades of blue. And its tummy is a little bit darker, but the blues and so on are going right through the entire painting. You can of course do the details, the feet, later or now. It depends on how you feel comfortable with painting it. And the thin brush helps a lot here to minimize the amount of paint that you add, because it's such a small painting. If you have a bigger brush, you might add too much paint, and then it's going to look very flat. Adding all the colors to the bird while everything is still wet helps a lot to let them spread into each other, and will eventually make the feathering a lot more natural. So while you wait for the bird to dry a little bit, now you can go over back to the leaves and add another layer or a little bit more detail to some of the leaves. You can add veins to it, or just add a little bit more dense color to it, just to give them more life. Now the bird hasn't dried completely, so adding some more colors will just help them spread a little bit more. But don't be afraid, just use the tip of the brush and add touches of color here and there. Now the tummy of the bird needs to be a lot lighter than what we had it there, so just dab it out with a paper towel. And then you can let the painting dry completely again. Now, core colors don't fade back as much as other colors, it seems. The vibrancy is still there. Here we're adding some more blue to the bird, and it is just to enhance the color a little bit. Layering in watercolor is really important if you want to give dimension to your elements. And layering can be done wet on wet, but mostly wet on dry. If your painting is completely dry, then the layering can be done a lot easier. Just be very careful with some of the paintings, if you press too hard, or if you have used a very transparent color, non-staining color, then it might lift your bottom layer. So take care when you do add your next layer of paint. Now for the rest of this process, it is basically just going to be adding another layer and another layer until you are satisfied with the result. You can add as many layers as you want. Mostly remember that the bottom layer should be dry first. It is always best to let the bottom layers dry first before you add your next layer. If you have a delicate touch, then it will be very easy to add the extra layers without lifting the bottom paint or the first layers. Now you will see that the flowers at the moment looked fairly formless, but by adding your next layer and forming shadow sides with it, you are now defining the shapes of the flowers a little bit more. Each petal now stands out a little bit more and you can see it more clearly. Shaping with darker colors or with opposite colors, complementary colors, can really make a difference to what your outcome would be. You really don't have to add a lot of detail to the leaves. Just a line, a dot, a dash here and there, just to allow your eyes to fill in all the details. And remember to keep the white spot on the bird's eye for the reflection. It will definitely make it look more lifelike. A few outlines here and there on the bird just to give it a little bit more definition, and to define the beak and feathers a little bit more. Fine lines just hatching here and there. It's really not necessary in this case to try to paint each and every feather or each and every vein. Remember, this is just an illustration. It is just a little painting for fun. Very fine lines there for the hatching for the feathers. And there we have it, our little illustration of a bird on a branch. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and please leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. Have a very, very nice day. Vaya con Dios.